So, Canada. Beautiful lakes, gorgeous mountains, and supposedly high standards of living. But is it really so? Follow me on this adventure across this vast country and I'll show you what's real and what is just the hype. In this episode, we'll explore the overrated charm of Vancouver, delve into the historical depth of Ottawa, and experience the European flair of Montreal. We'll also talk about wildfires and tornadoes, expose some corrupt systems in place, and taste some local food. And of course, we'll hike a few mountains and lakes and visit Banff National Park at the best possible time to avoid any crowd. So grab a drink and a snack and let's get started. So usually it's not popular to show negative sides of some countries on social medias because picture is not that pleasant and also people don't like to change their mind about something. It's especially true in case of Canada because on paper this country looks just too good to be true. Most of my personal opinion about Canada I will leave to myself and will do my best to show you mainly positive sides of this country and will fit all negative stuff in just 6 minutes of this 1-hour video. So let's begin. I'll start with Vancouver, as it is the city where I lived the longest and which in my opinion is the most overrated of all. But first, I'd like to point out that Vancouver's transportation system is the most developed and convenient in Canada, which is a huge plus. For just $10, you can buy a day pass that allows you unlimited use of all buses, the SkyTrain, which is what they call the subway here, and even the ferries. Vancouver is typical American-style city, but it also has its port, which receives about 1.5 million tourists per season. They come here to see the skyscrapers, the port itself, Stanley Park, which I'll tell you about very soon, and this steam clock. But literally 200 meters from this building, a new world opens up, one that is not usually highlighted. That's Hastings Street, a street that is legendary among Vancouver residents because it starts in the heart of the city and is the central hub for drug addicts and homeless. Unfortunately, this is a common trend in large cities across Canada. These individuals, according to official government statements, are homeless by their own choice, and they need to be supported and cared for. The problem lies in the fact that there is a corrupt system in place where money is simply being laundered. It's all very simple. There are organizations that receive billions of dollars from the government to provide for the homeless and help them get back on the right track. But the catch is that the amount of money depends on the number of homeless people. So, these organizations redirect funds not toward physical or psychological treatment or assistance with self-development and employment, but rather towards free drugs and pocket money. And yes, in Canada, they have the right and gladly take advantage of it to go to medical facilities and receive doses of hard drugs, the hardest ones, because the regular ones are of no interest to them. And that's why the number of residents on Hastings Street increases year by year, and so does the amount of money the government allocates to so-called assistance. Every year this amount grows and it has already reached $30 billion per year just for funding the social services for homeless. But enough of negativity. Let's focus on the positive. Vancouver's undeniable advantage is its nature. Unlike other major cities in Canada such as Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, where you need to drive 3, 4 or even 6 hours to reach nature, mountains, lakes, here you can reach the ocean, mountains or lakes in about 30-40 minutes. And often all of these at once. And I'll tell you about this very soon, but first Vancouver's parks. Or more precisely, the main park, Stanley Park. In Vancouver, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of small and medium-sized parks scattered throughout different neighborhoods. And they are all nice and well-maintained, but Stanley Park stands out. Let's start with the fact that it's located right in the heart of the city and within a walking distance from the port and Canada Place. Its size is also quite impressive, considering that it's in the city center and not some outskirts. It covers 400 hectares. For comparison, Central Park in New York is 340 hectares. This park is highly refined and accessible, yet there are still wild coyotes, bears, and occasionally even cougars roaming around. In addition to the usual things like trees, clearings, and food stands, there are also many kilometers of wild trails by local standards, cool observation decks, an abandoned polar bear enclosure, and even 3 beaches. And since it is the North Pacific Ocean, the water here rarely reaches a swimmable temperature. So people mainly come here to sunbathe, stroll, bike, play some beach games, and of course enjoy the sunset. I walked through this park from end to end, but it took me 8 hours of continuous brisk walking. So I can confidently say that the park is large, beautiful, and there is plenty to see here. The only thing you might notice is that no matter how far you go or how hard you try to feel alone with nature, you won't be able to get rid of the noise of cars or helicopters. In the middle of this park runs a wide highway road that leads to the North Vancouver area, and cars are constantly passing through here. You can also drive around the park to the main viewpoint, and of course most people just come here for a few minutes to take some photos. And if you turn off the background music and return the video to real sound, this is what the quietest part of the park that I could find looks and sounds like. Well, not so quiet. But this doesn't really affect the overall impression of the park, and I especially like the shoreline here. There is a road just for cyclists and rollerbladers without cars, a clean beach, and several food trucks where you can buy ice cream or some fish and chips. I personally prefer nature over cities, and when it comes to Canada, this preference multiplies by 10. And let's start with the Sea to Sky Highway. It's just a fancy name for a several 100-kilometer stretch of road with breathtaking views, which start right from the Stanley Park. As soon as you cross the bridge from Vancouver, you are greeted with Canadian landscapes, straight out of movies and social media. And they are not exaggerated, embellished, or photoshopped at all. The scenery changes every 15 minutes, and on this route there are hundreds, if not thousands, of hiking trails, hundreds of lakes, dozens of waterfalls, and none of it is interrupted by advertising signs, skyscrapers, or factories. Due to the nature of my job, which involved thousands of kilometers driving through the western part of Canada, I've traveled this stretch of highway dozens of times, and still didn't get tired of these views. I also had the opportunity to hike in this mountain several times, but this time I only had 2 days, which wasn't enough to show the most beautiful hikes. But still, I managed to do something. On the first day, my goal was to hike to Garibaldi Lake. About an hour drive from Vancouver, after getting off the main highway, we find ourselves on a small road leading to the start of the trail. And yes, the roads in Canada are far from perfect. And if we exclude the main highways, the roads here are not good at all. This trail is very popular, and as you saw, there were about 150 parked cars even on a weekday evening. However, I didn't see any litter along the entire route, not a single discarded bottle or any trash at all. The trail is also wide enough for an evacuation vehicle to pass through easily. Yet there is no hint that any vehicle, not even motorcycle, has ever driven through here. And it's not even protected area yet. The trail itself is 9 kilometers long, but without steep ascents, this 9 kilometers doesn't feel like a problem at all. The fresh air of the vast forest, the cool shade, and the spring water makes the hike even more enjoyable. In just 2.5 hours, I reached the lake just a little bit too late to catch the sunset. Overall, I prefer overnight hikes because they truly allow you to disconnect from everyday life and enjoy the nature. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough time, but this place is definitely worth staying longer.
start again. Don't rush me. I just want a little more time. Standing on the shoulder.
I met a few people here who came to camp overnight. There are several designated shelters, toilets, and these metal chains to hang backpacks with food. It's for safety, because bears are frequent guests here. Since I was limited on time and didn't want to return to the car in the middle of the night, I spent less than an hour here. Took a short walk, chatted with other tourists, and thought to myself that this is a perfect spot for a quick lunch. And when I was almost back in the forest, I realized I hadn't missed the sunset after all, because the colors became even more Instagram worthy, and I had to take out the drone again. Before embarking on the nighttime journey back, I flew the drone. Little did I know it was the last successful flight of this drone. So this is how this morning should have started. With a lake, mountains, and just beautiful, relaxing morning. And especially with a cup of coffee. But for some reason, I thought it would be a great idea to fly the drone. And since I was sleepy, I just didn't see the power lines. So my drone is completely destroyed right now. I have a DJI insurance, DJI Care, Refresh, something like that. So I'm gonna send my drone back to them, and hopefully I will get the new one or repaired one pretty soon. I will let you know by the end of the video. And not even by the end of the video, but right now. It's the first time in my life I've bought something with insurance, and it saved me. Not without some arguments and hassles, but DJI really sent a new drone to me promptly. And even the shipping of the broken drone to them and the new drone to me was included. So instead of spending like $900 on new drone, I only paid $70. Overall, the experience with DJI insurance was pleasant, I would say, and I would definitely recommend you to consider it when buying a drone. And now let's get back to Canada. More precisely to Whistler, the largest ski resort in Canada. This town has a population of only 14,000, but over 2 million tourists visit here annually. The infrastructure here is very developed with plenty of amenities, and yet the natural environment remains untouched. Until 1932, this town was called London Mountain because folk typically hangs very low here. But this name didn't quite fit the ski theme, so it was changed to Whistler, in honor of the whistle made by a marmot.
Maybe that is the colony. Maybe we just don't stay still long enough usually. I can see two over there, and there's one beneath us. And Fred here, who's making sense.
Primarily, it's a powerful ski resort with plenty of Guinness records, and even hosted the 2010 Winter Olympics. But as you can see, there aren't many skiers here in summer, so talking about skiing right now doesn't quite feel the vibe. Being in Canada and not going hiking is like being in Rome and not seeing the Colosseum. So I went hiking. My goal was to reach the mountain called Whistler, and I went to tourist center to ask how I could do it. So I've been told I have two options. First one is pay $90. Second is hike 25 kilometers one way. Obviously, I'm gonna hike. There are not many hiking trails here, after all, it's primarily a ski resort. In the summer, most of people take the gondola up the mountain, take a look around, and then head back down. For mountain biking enthusiasts, there are several trails that sometimes intersect with hiking trails. I've never seen such an intersection in the mountains before. The beginning of the trail was very noisy, due to the bikes and the sound of the ski lifts. But after about an hour, the atmosphere of solitude began, which I really enjoyed and was happy to walk for miles even uphill. Honestly, I even felt relieved that I saved $90 and decided to make my way up the mountain on my own 2 feet, as I was probably the only one doing so that day. Hey, I'm not at the top yet, but I already have something to share with you. First thing is, it's absolutely worthless to pay $90 for this. Instead, you can just easily hike. It's nice, beautiful, peaceful, and quiet. There are basically no people on your way. I met maybe like 4-5 people going down. That's all. No cars, no stuff like that. Second, the hike itself is very, very picturesque and beautiful. First, you start with a shitty trail, to be honest, right next to gondolas and bicycles. Not cool at all. But just an hour later, you get into the forest and it just changes everything. Another 2 hours and you get to the first valleys, which are just beautiful green valleys. And just far, far, far you can see the ice caps of the other mountains. A third cool thing is that you can camp here, actually. Not everywhere, you can't just put a tent right here, but there are a few campsites and they're basically free. So if you come here for a few days, which I recommend, you can just stay here for free. So the last thing, I climbed 3 hills, like that green one, that second one, and third one right now. So this is the last hill. I already can see the ski trails marks over there, and I have to get to the top by 4:30, because apparently at 4:30 the last gondola leaves. And a tip for you is, if you hike up here, you can go down by gondola for free. It's not something like illegal or not common, it's okay, it's allowed. There are even signs over here that because the hike is so steep, it might be dangerous going down, so they recommend you to use the gondolas, which is pretty cool. But if I don't make it on time and the last gondola leaves, I will have no other option than just go back 23 kilometers, and I really don't want to do it. Hey guys, so I made it alive. I actually still have like 20 minutes. Turns out that the last one leaves at around 5 o'clock. So there are quite a lot of people right now getting on the chairlift. And while they do that, I still have time to take a few shots over here. And now for the next part of the video, I upgraded my team and hired a scriptwriter who decided where and when should we stop, a cameraman who insisted on filming everything on camera and drone, and a driver. But on more serious note, it's just my brother and my nephews who decided to go to Calgary to visit friends, and invited me to join them to explore even more interesting and beautiful mountains and lakes. Distances in Canada are tens, sometimes hundreds of times larger than in Europe. It's hard to even imagine how far apart everything is here, without a comparison. So I'll use Ukraine as an example since it's the largest country in Europe. For instance, from the major city of Vancouver to the nearest major city, Prince George, it's 800 kilometers, which is like driving from Lviv to Odessa. To the next one, Calgary, it's almost 1,000 kilometers, similar to driving from Kharkiv to Ivano-Frankivsk. So to travel from one major city to another takes approximately 10 hours. And the distance is almost equivalent to the width of the largest country in Europe. And along the way between these cities, there are only small towns and villages. And this is on the west coast of Canada near America. In less populated provinces, these distances are even greater. But Canada has something to flex with. In 1950, the construction of the Trans-Canada Highway began, and 12 years later it was successfully completed. This road is toll-free, in great condition, and stretches for 7,820 kilometers, around 5,000 miles. It's hard to make a comparison to European distances, but it's like getting from Portugal to Estonia and back. In short, these distances doesn't quite align with European ones. This highway starts on Vancouver Island in the west and ends on Cape Breton Island in the east, connecting all the provinces of Canada. But more importantly for us, it leads to the most famous, Instagramming and most visited park in Canada. And let's start with the train station, Banff. And yeah, we'll begin with the train station, because this national park was named after this exact train station in 1930. This town, bearing the same name as the national park, has only 8,000 residents, but is still the heart of Canadian tourism. Situated right in the middle of the national park, it enjoys a constant influx of tourists. There are several museums, plenty of restaurants and hotels, but all of this pales in comparison to the city's landscapes. At first glance, it may seem too perfect, almost as if it was planned in advance. And if that's what you thought, you're right. This area was discovered in the late 1800s, when local workers laying down railway tracks stumbled upon hot springs. which combined with such landscapes were destined to become a tourist attraction and a lucrative business. But a dispute arose among major businesses, and rather than figuring out who should own what, the Canadian government decided it would be best if it all belonged to the state. So, in 1885, they simply declared the opening of the Banff Hot Springs Reserve, which became Canada's first national park. Beneficiaries of tourism were government and the Canadian Pacific Railway. Since this area was never used for anything other than tourism and wasn't intended for regular settlement or cultivation, but purely for business, everything was very well organized and preserved here. For example, this central avenue of the town with its perfectly framed view of the mountain. It's no coincidence, but a planned lure. And it worked. Every year, over 4 million people from all over the world visit this park. And the photos and videos from this park are mesmerizing and seem unreal. Personally, I like the street names. Instead of usual numbering system in Canada and USA, where streets are named boringly like Street 1, House 10 and so on up to Street, Avenue, Road, Drive, or something like that, here the streets are named after animals. Squirrel Street, Crane Street, Deer Street, Moose Street, and so on. I only saw 2 streets named differently, and those were the Main Street, Banff Avenue, and the Railway Street, where the station is located. At the time of the park's founding, it covered an area of only 26 square kilometers, but by 1930 it expanded to 6,500. Despite the interest of major companies and corporations in the area's development, the main factor was Ukrainians. Yes, I was surprised too when I found out about it. And I found out by accident. On the way from Banff to Vancouver, we stopped to grab some coffee in a small village at a small roadside cafe. And as I was leaving, the word Ukrainian caught my eye on a local notice board. Then I read something about commemorating and internment camps. That's when I began digging into the whole page of Canadian history and Ukrainians that I didn't know about before. And although it's all very nice now, it didn't start out that way. The thing is, tens of thousands of Ukrainian immigrants came here in search of better life as early as 1800s to escape from Russian Empire. So, by the early 1900s, over 300,000 Ukrainians had immigrated to Canada. Well, to put it briefly, many Ukrainians settled in the prairies and the mountains not far from here. Ukrainians were hardworking, so they did all the hard work to somehow settle in on these new wild lands. But when the First World War broke out, Ukrainians started getting imprisoned in internment camps by thousands. One of such camps was in Banff, where tens of thousands were engaged in unpaid labor under terrible conditions. And it was at the Castle Mountain internment camp where conditions were considered exceptionally harsh and abusive. Of course, corporations and the state understood the profit they could gain from it. These practically enslaved people paved the way to what is probably the most popular lake and hotel. They also extracted and processed stones for the construction and expansion of this hotel, and they also carved out a huge portion of the tourist trails in this park. Even now, the Canadian government allocates billions of dollars just to add an additional lane next to the existing road and infrastructure, and with the existing equipment. Back at that time, all of this was done just by hands and basic tools. But enough of history. Here, let's go back to our timer for a few seconds. The path to Canada's most famous lake was laid back in 1902, and it had been free and accessible to everyone until 2023. When the authorities decided to close the access to everyone except the hotel residents right on the lake's shore, where a night starts at $1,500 during summer. As an alternative, they allowed using their hotel shuttles, but such a trip would cost $35 per person for a 10-15 minutes ride. So for 4 of us, it would have been $140. But even if we were willing to pay that much, it wouldn't have worked out because all the trips for that day had long been sold out. And the nearest one was the next day at noon. So I said goodbye to the boys and set off on my own. Bye!
Bye.
You could walk along this paved road, but I had walked it several times already and knew it was very monotonous. So at the first intersection, I turned onto a small trail. It was about 1 kilometer longer but much more interesting and quieter. About a kilometer from the lake, I descended to the main road. As it was getting dark and I didn't want to walk through the dark forest with signs saying beware of bears. I didn't catch the sunset, but there wasn't much to catch. Unfortunately, I arrived on cloudy days, and I was glad that at least it wasn't raining. There is one viewpoint from which they usually take the pictures of this lake, so that's where I went. Late in the evening, when their last shuttle picks up the last group of tourists, it becomes incredibly beautiful and quiet here. Unfortunately, it was getting late and I needed to find a place to pitch my tent and get some sleep, as I decided to wake up at 5:30 to catch the sunrise. So I just had a dinner at this open-air restaurant with unreal view and went to find a place to spend the night.
Hey, so I just got here. It's 6 a.m. A few people already here on the rocks, a few walking around. Temperature went down to 0 this night, maybe a bit even lower. And right now I just have a hoodie and pants. So it's very cold, but it's worth it. There are almost no people around, and this beautiful scenery is definitely worth it.
Besides admiring the views, there is not much else to do here. But in such places, you don't really want to do anything except enjoying the beauty of nature. Unfortunately, I cannot show you any enchanting shoots like in movies from the drone because, according to the logic of the current Canadian government, drones are too noisy and destroying the local flora and fauna.
So, cars, buses, and even trucks are not noisy. Hundreds of tourists are not noisy. And even the huge machinery that was brought here to dig the foundation and build the cottages is not noisy. Moreover, the road construction equipment in the park disrupting the wildlife is not harmful or noisy. But it's the small recreational drones that are the worst evil, for which they can fine you up to $25,000. But of course, if you're not an ordinary traveler with a small drone but a person with money, you can hire a helicopter tour or buy a commercial drone filming permit. Because when you're paying a few $1,000s, you're not scaring birds, only when you're flying small recreational drones. Here I would like to bust the myth that Canada is a corruption-free country and that you cannot get anything sorted out here, like in other countries. At the level of simple everyday stuff, you really can't get anything sorted out here. But Canadian businessmen and politicians are no different from those in any other country. So this place is a national park and everything, according to the plan, should belong to the state. Everything should be for people. But of course, that's not the case. Just 5 years ago, when I was at this lake for the first time, there were none of these buildings except for the large tourist center. But specifically this building appeared here in the early 1900s and since then was only renovated. Just 2 years ago, you could drive all the way to the lake with your own car, bring your own canoe that probably cost maybe like $50 on Amazon, and pedal on this lake for free. Those who didn't have their own canoe could rent one of these for $70 an hour. And that's when I saw these huge trucks and excavators here for the first time. They already started construction of these cottages. So what can we see this year? This year, road is closed by the Park Service to prevent the passage of ordinary people. The price of canoe doubled in just a year because there is no more option to bring your own. And the only option left to get here is by bus for $35 each, as I mentioned earlier. A night in a smallest room off-season starts at $1,000. In summer, everything is booked and the price goes way beyond a couple $1,000s. All of this is, of course, in private ownership, and these buses alone make thousands of dollars per day. If you count simply like $35 per seat, 40-50 seats in a bus, and 2 such buses are going every half hour, it comes up to a pretty good amount. Also, to emphasize the superiority of those with money, even this building that previously was a shelter for tourists was divided into 3 parts. A souvenir shop, a cafe, and 3/4 of the whole building as restaurant for the privileged, in which you're not even allowed to enter, even if you have all the money in the world and want to buy something. And all of this is happening right in the heart of Canadian tourism, in National Park, in the most famous and popular place in Canada, well, maybe except for Niagara Falls.
30 minutes later, buses started arriving with tourists, and from the perfect spot, this beauty turned into ordinary tourist chaos. We all climbed on this little rock formation and started looking for the perfect spot to watch the sunrise. I climbed onto this rock to get a better view and started waiting. There was no stunning sunrise because of the clouds, and there were too many people, so I moved on. Before leaving the park, I would like to tell you about another positive aspect of the park, namely camping. Simply pitching a tent wherever you want here is dangerous due to the large numbers of wild animals, and it's strictly prohibited and heavily fined. There are quite a few campsites and all of them need to be reserved in advance, because often there are no spots available on the same day, especially in the summer season. But the price includes safety, firewood, parking, a communal kitchen, and just beautiful hiking trails through the forest and along the river. And the best part, which is always lacking in the mountains after a long hot day, is a nice toilet and a shower with hot water. The price varies greatly, but overall it's very affordable, from $10, $15 to $50 per night. And if it seems like a high price for a night, here is how many available accommodation there is within 1 hour radius from these lakes. Yes, only 2 rooms available, and both are over $500 per night. But before going back to the big cities, let's stop by a small town 1,000 kilometers further north, where I was sent for work. In Canada, any settlement with more than 1,500 people is considered a town. One such town is Chetwynd, where I lived and worked for a week.
Closing up shop, closing up my store.
For a population of 2,500, there is quite a lot of infrastructure here. A large school, playgrounds, dozens of restaurants, an entertainment center with an ice rink, and much more. But what caught my interest were these wooden exhibits. In June, an annual international chainsaw carving tournament takes place here. There are only 2 such tournaments in the world, here and in Japan. The tournament lasts for 4 days, after which the winner is determined. Participants are given a large piece of wood for the main work and 35 hours.
My back is broke, my head
Also, they are giving a small piece to create a small sculpture, which is sold at an auction and the proceedings go to the winner. Some businesses buy or commission sculptures from participants, giving them the opportunity to earn money even if they don't win the tournament. The level of creativity and scale of this event is truly impressive.
I know I'm getting close to bed country. The city was
Just look at the size and the level of detailing. There are super cute and friendly creatures, ordinary animals, mystical creatures, movie characters, robots, dragons, dinosaurs, and much more. Now, my favorite is this oldest of the ants, with a mouse on its head, which was carved by some American at 2018's competition. For comparison, I'm about 180 meters tall and reach up to his waist, so the height of this sculpture is about 4 meters, and the level of detail is impressive.
So to summarize, I wouldn't say that it's something that you should definitely visit if you come to Canada, because it's quite far from all the big cities and other attractions. But if you happen to pass by, it's definitely worth stopping or visiting, just because it looks quite nice. It's very unique, just two places in the whole world with such a event, tournament, and I think it's nice time to spend 1 or 2 hours in this village.
By the way, did you notice the change in colors and constant haziness around? This is not filters or Photoshop, not even so-called golden hour of the day or some cool sunset behind. It's actually smoke. Smoke from a fire that is hundreds of kilometers away from me, but the consequences are felt all the way here. I stayed here for a week and my eyes never stopped watering, and the smell of smoke in the air was constant. And this is one of the biggest problems in Canada, wildfires. Wildfires occur almost every year and are simply staggering in scale. Some only claim the lives of wild animals, some burn down villages, and some harm thousands of people. But the most powerful ones burn down entire towns, including buildings. The fires can be so large that they are sometimes measured in European countries. For example, the largest fire in 2014 covered an area of 34,000 square kilometers. This is more than whole Moldova, Belgium, Macedonia, almost twice the size of Slovenia. And there can be several such fires in a year in different regions. I couldn't film the fire itself because the roads were closed and I no longer had the drone at that time. But when I was passing by the fire-affected areas for work in different parts of British Columbia, I had the opportunity to see the whole burned forest with my own eyes. It's really sad to see nature being destroyed and realize that it will never be the same as it was, if it even survives in any form. But this burned forest inspired me to visit a unique place. And while it's over like 25 degrees in Vancouver right now, on this side of the Rocky Mountains, it's barely goes up to like 10-12 degrees in the middle of the day. So it's time to get some warm clothes and show you some cool place. I'll remind you that I'm currently 850 kilometers away from the ocean and just as far from Vancouver. That means I'm no longer in the same climate. Everything is quite different here. Despite Canada already being among the top countries in terms of nature conservation, with almost 100 provincial and 48 national parks, there are still lesser known or undeveloped places that are being protected from businesses. This ancient forest provincial park is the newest park in British Columbia and was established in 2016. The short history of this park is approximately as follows. For centuries, indigenous peoples of Canada lived on these lands. Over the years, roads and towns were built here. The main industry in this wild land was, of course, logging, and a huge number of trees were cut down. A graduate from one of the local universities conducted research on plant species in the area and stumbled upon several medical plants that had been considered lost forever for years. But what's more interesting is that he found red cedar trees. More interesting than the size of these trees is the fact that this whole park was tropical. Yes, a temperate tropical park is not uncommon. But this one is unique because it's the only one in the world surrounded by land and other natural climate zones. There are many such forests in the world, even in Canada and even in British Columbia itself, but they are all located on the coast of the ocean, while this one somehow ended up 850 kilometers away from the ocean. And when this student made his little discovery, it turned out that most of these trees had already been marked for logging. But thanks to public outcry and volunteers, they managed to attract the attention of masses and built the first tourist trails. And then the government had no other choice but to cancel logging and pretend as if they had planned everything like this from the beginning, and later declare it a new provincial park. At the entrance, there is a board with a list of sponsors, and there is also a thank you note to the volunteers who laid the trails. Now this place is just a beautiful forest with several kilometers of well-made trails, a few benches and informative signs. It's just a place to come to relax, take a breath and realize that although nature is grand, it still needs protection, mainly from other people.
Yeah, this is just majestic. This tree is like huge. It says on this sign that it's over 5 meters in diameter because this sign was put here in July 2007, so like 16 years ago. I think it's even bigger right now. But the important thing to remember is, even though this tree is huge, according to this sign, if you walk around too close, if you touch the roots, it can and it most likely will hurt the tree and its roots. So yeah, just follow the rules and don't touch the trees and stay on trail in areas like this.
And now with some editing magic, let's quickly cover almost 5,000 kilometers and find ourselves in the capital of Canada, Ottawa. Well, first and foremost, the main building of the Canadian Parliament, the stereotype of capitals. At first glance, Ottawa doesn't differ much from Toronto, Vancouver, or most of Canadian cities. Familiar glass or concrete and glass skyscrapers, lots of cars, and everyone rushing somewhere. But there are a few beautiful and even unique places here that I'll show you. But first, coffee and the main Canadian national dish.
The national traditional Canadian meal is called poutine. It looks like this. It's basically French fries with some gravy and cheese on top. Very tasty, nice fast food. You can find it on basically every corner of the streets. But there is one thing. In general, food in Canada is not healthy at all, and that causes some problem. Over 60% of population is overweight, which is not a problem because it's just a few kilograms and it doesn't affect the health. But every fourth Canadian, over 25%, are obese. They suffer the obesity. And when I say obesity, I'm not trying to offend or upset anyone, and not just expressing my opinion. I'm using this word as a medical term for this condition. And here I would like to emphasize that not only poutine or fast food in general are to blame for health problems. These are just some of the main factors. I don't want to dive too deeply into this topic, but food is part of traveling, and I wanted to quickly talk about it. Standards and allowed norms in food are very different in Canada from the European ones, and it applies not only to ready-made foods like Snickers or Coca-Cola, but even to the basic ones like flour, meat, or vegetables. Large corporations have had to change the ingredients of their products in order to be able to sell in Europe, so even seemingly universal stuff like sweets are tastier and much less harmful in Europe. The same goes for vegetables, fruits, and basically everything. Canada has a great purchasing power, so large corporations made everything possible to monopolize this market. They import cheap, poor quality products from third countries, making local businesses uncompetitive and inaccessible to average people. If you go to large supermarkets, you will be able to buy fruits, vegetables, meat, everything at very reasonable price, but the quality will be very low. If you want to buy truly organic stuff, you would have to pay 2, 5, or sometimes even 10 times more depending on the product. But bread is the stuff of life, so I wanted to show you an example with it. About 9 years ago, I decided to experiment with the shelf life of Canadian bread for the first time. And then I got bored and gave up in like 2 weeks. But this time I decided to stick to it longer, so I bought a bun at the regular supermarket. For fans of prices, real bread in a good bakery here will cost around $10–12, while a regular supermarket one will cost $1 to $2. I bought these buns in September 2023 and put one aside in the bag to take as a souvenir from Canada and see the result. In order to not forget about the experiment, I kept this bun next to my coffee machine and checked for any changes every day. Days passed, weeks, a month went by, and when I moved, I forgot to keep filming it every day. But here we are, May 2024, 9 months since I bought and unpacked this bun. It still holds up. It hasn't really changed in appearance, smell, or touch. So you can draw your own conclusion about quality of such food.
This was the last note of negativity in this video. From now on, there will only be positive things. This was my third visit to this city, so it didn't particularly impress or surprise me. However, because of this, I was able to form a somewhat objective impression of the city, despite spending only 1 day here this time. I like that it's not just a pure business center with the production of high-rise concrete glass structures like Toronto, for example. Here and there you can see some taste in the architecture, which is pleasing to the eye. Also, many tourists come here, and therefore city adapts to tourists and becomes better. Besides their architecture, there are many museums, tourist attractions, parks, and squares here. And the city center itself is walkable, unlike 99% of cities in Canada. The main highlight of Ottawa is the canal, which is the only UNESCO site in the entire province of Ontario. 200 years ago, it was built as an alternative river route to deliver provision from Montreal and Ottawa to Kingston, which at that time was the capital of Canada. They built it to have a river access to a route that didn't border the United States. Now it's just a beautiful canal that can be controlled. So in warm weather, boats sail here, and in the cold, the water freezes, turning into the world's largest ice rink. I don't have any winter photos or videos, but it looks something like this. Almost 8 kilometers of free 24-hour skating rink. Just imagine that. This is the main parliament building, where officials sit and come up with ideas of what everyone should do.
Yeah, I got unlucky with weather. It's changing rapidly and every few hours, from rainstorm to hot sun. But luckily I'm just going to this excursion to the museum, so everything should be fine.
You can take a free tour if you register in advance. Video recording is prohibited inside, so I cannot show anything special. But it's just beautiful buildings, and the guide tells you the story of the building's construction and its modern use. I'm not a fan of tours, but since it's free, you can go for half an hour. During this trip I wasn't very lucky with the weather, and as I stepped outside I received this notification. Light rain was joined by wind, and I realized it was better to end the walk around Ottawa at this point.
A tornado touched down in the Ottawa area during a severe thunderstorm on Thursday. Environment Canada confirmed it happened at around 7 p.m. near Metcalfe, just southeast of the nation's capital. Time-lapse video shows the incredible storm moving into the region.
I arrived in Montreal in the evening, and it immediately felt like I had entered a completely different country. A few things struck me right away. First of all, I found out that in a city with a population of almost 4 million, there were practically no available places in hostels or hotels within an hour walk from the center. This is unusual for the city. Second, the nightlife. Unlike other Canadian cities, nightlife here is not about restaurants or nightclubs, but more European style. That means a delicious dinner on a terrace with a view of a beautiful square and live music walks. Third, a huge area called Old Town, which stretches for kilometers of cobblestone roads, beautiful architecture, and no cars. You can really just walk around here. It might seem strange that I emphasize the ability to walk and the lack of cars somewhere, but this is the reality of Canada. In Europe, you can enjoy walking around the city and commuting to work on foot, but here, they first build highways, and everything builds around the cars regardless of the city and its size. That's why I was so impressed by Montreal. The nighttime center of Montreal is roughly divided in two parts. One part is in the very center, with beautiful streets where street musicians create an European atmosphere. The other part is the festivals area. Montreal is just a paradise for those who like festivals. Nearly 100 festivals are held here annually. Most of them take place from May to September, so the density of music during this time is unreal. I'm not a fan of festivals or big concerts, so I enjoyed the first part of the nightlife more. And not for too long, because I needed to sleep before the next day. I slept exactly 4 hours, because I wanted to catch a beautiful sunrise with a view of the city from the mountain.
This is where we begin. Behind me there is a mountain called Royal, and the city was named after this mountain, Mount Royal, Montreal.
The weather was cloudy and my camera isn't very suitable for shooting in poor light, so it turned out like this. Mount Royal or Mont Royal is the French version of the phrase Royal Mountain, which is a great compliment to the city. A whole mountain that is also a park is located in the city center, just a few minutes walk from the old town. Calling it a mountain is a bit an exaggeration, as its height is only 233 meters. But how many cities have a mountain right in the center? An interesting fact about the mountain's height is the official ban on building skyscrapers taller than this mountain. Therefore, the tallest building in the city is only 205 meters. And in my opinion, it's better to have a beautiful park with a great view of the city than to compete over who has the taller tower. By the way, since I mentioned New York, I should say that in its early development, the city hired the famous landscape designer Frederick Law Olmsted, who designed Central Park in New York. The sunrise didn't work out, but thanks to waking up so early, I was able to enjoy the city center before thousands of people filled the streets. And this is the best time to explore any city in general. Noticing architectural details that are missed when it's crowded and not being in a hurry. Compared to the other Canadian cities, Montreal looks just too good to be true. Just a few quick facts where Montreal is either the first or the best or the largest or something like that. Montreal is the first city in North America to have been designated a UNESCO City of Design. The Montreal Tower is the world's tallest inclined structure at 175 meters. It leans at an angle of 45 degrees. For comparison, the famous Leaning Tower of Pisa only leans at 4 degrees and is 1/3 of the height. The Montreal Tower stands next to the Olympic Stadium, and it is the largest stadium in Canada by seating capacity. St. Joseph Oratory is the largest church in Canada. Montreal hosts the most international events in North America. The Montreal International Jazz Festival is the largest international jazz festival in the world. More than 85% of the world's maple syrup comes from Quebec. The largest French music festival in the world is held in Montreal. Barbie Expo Montreal is the world's largest permanent exposition of Barbie dolls with over 1,000 unique Barbies on display. The oldest brewery in North America, Molson, was found in Montreal in 1786. The world's first modern ice hockey game was played in Montreal in 1875. In 1976, Montreal hosted the first ever Summer Olympics Games in Canada. The world's biggest circus was founded in Montreal. The second largest French-speaking city in the world after Paris is Montreal. The Montreal Museum of Fine Arts is the largest art museum in Canada. And just many others. Before this trip, I was skeptical about this city because it seemed too good on paper, and I didn't even consider it as an option. But since it's just 2 hours away from Ottawa, I decided to give it a try. It's truly beautiful here, with unique atmosphere. Thousands of tourists who come here to party, mixed with thousands more who come here to visit museums and restaurants, create a feeling of a lively city rather than a concrete jungle. Even in the business districts with the skyscrapers, there is a charm. As there is always an old church or government building nearby that makes you feel like you're in Paris for a second. In recent years, the world has been experiencing a housing crisis, and this is very noticeable in Canada. The average cost of a house 5 years ago was $450,000, now it's almost $800,000. This is the average price across Canada. In Vancouver, it can be several million for an apartment. Here is just an example of prices on a random real estate website. As you can see, 2-bedroom apartments in downtown Vancouver go for $6-8 million. Houses in the worst and furthest areas will start about $2-3 million and reach up to $20 the closer you get to the center. This is an astronomical rate of increase in real estate prices. And of course, this has affected rental prices as well. In Vancouver, for example, the average rent for a 2-bedroom apartment has risen from approximately $2,200 to $2,900. And these are just the official figures, which I believe are understated because I myself was looking for an apartment and was surprised at how the prices were rising not by the day but by the hour. For example, when I arrived in Canada in February 2021 and looked at apartment rentals in one building, the price was $1,600. This is not Vancouver, but a town called New Westminster in the vicinity, so prices are cheaper. Year and a half later, when I was leaving Canada and just out of interest I checked the prices in the same building for the same apartments, the price was already $2,300, which is a bit more than 30% increase in a year and a half. But Montreal manages to keep the rental prices significantly better. The average rent here is $1,900 compared to Vancouver's $2,900. And this is a noticeable difference of over 30%. Although the average salary difference is only $1,700 per year. Same thing goes for groceries, schools, kindergartens, utilities, communication, and almost everything. Therefore, Montreal gets another big plus from me and pleasantly surprises once again. Also, Montreal is quite a bike-friendly city. I saw whole groups of cyclists several times. And generally, outside of Old Montreal but near the center, it is quite comfortable to get around without a car, which is very untypical for Canadian cities. This weekend, besides several music festivals, there was an Italian culture festival in the city's Little Italy neighborhood. Dozens of nationalities gather and hang out near each other in one city. And Ukrainians are no exceptions. I walked to a large Ukrainian church and saw dozens of Ukrainian flags on balconies and cars nearby. There is even a park named Ukraine here. Over the years I spent in Canada, I crossed this country several times. Of the 15 largest cities, I have been to 13, and in all the million-plus cities. But this city is the one that attracted me. All the other cities in Canada combined didn't have so much positive things for me. I got so carried away with walking around the city that I forgot I planned to catch the sunset from the same mountain, since the sunrise wasn't great. But, as luck would have it, Montreal's only disadvantage played out at that very moment. I'm almost there. I'm gonna be late, but I would like to outline one disadvantage, one very, very bad thing about this city. It's public transport. It's just horrible. It's the worst one I've ever seen in any city in Europe or America or Canada. Just horrible. So first of all, metro is going every 35-45 minutes. That's not enough for almost 2 million people. Second, they don't care about schedule. They are late frequently, and that's the reason why I'm late for the sunset, which was very beautiful, gorgeous, and I just see many people coming back right now while I'm still going to the sunset point. So yeah, public transport